Hello, this is Sailesh Rao, and I'm doing this Why I Went Vegan challenge. And I want to thank Luke Marsh for nominating me. So, the Why I Went Vegan challenge asks you to answer three questions. The first question is, what does vegan mean for you? To me, veganism is more than just diets or health or any of that. If you look at the original definition of veganism, it's you're vegan when you stop deliberately hurting innocent animals unnecessarily. And to me, that is a very spiritual path that you're taking. Because when you ask people whether you would deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily, almost everyone says no, you would never do that. And yet, in the world, there are more animals killed by human beings in 4 to 12 hours than all the humans that ever died in wars throughout human history put together. So there is a major disconnect between what we say and what we actually do. All those animals are dying because someone bought a product that caused some animal to die, and it caused some poor person of color to do this crummy job of killing animals. The worst job in the world, which is to kill animals. So a lot of our human oppressions or animal oppression all comes from our choices, consumer choices. So this is why I look at veganism as a spiritual path. It's a spiritual journey back to our hearts, back to what we say we are. We say we would never deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily, and yet with our actions we do. So when we go vegan, we are literally bringing our actions in alignment with our hearts. So I see it as an infinite journey. So when we stop consuming animal products, we are literally just on first base and on our way home. So it takes a long time for us to get from first base to second base. Second base is more about activism, and you have to go out and convince your fellow human beings to stop hurting animals, because by hurting animals, they're hurting other people as well. They're hurting people of color who are working in these slaughterhouses or in factory farms, and they're hurting people of color who live near these slaughterhouses, who are being affected by the pollution. So that's the second base. And third base is when you have shed all your consumption and you're minimizing your consumption, and because you see any act of consumption does hurt another animal somewhere. So it behooves us to minimize our consumption and to start contributing more to the planet than taking from it. So that brings us to third base. And of course, you go home when you become enlightened, so which is a long way. So I see veganism as a spiritual journey, much more than just eating plant-based foods. Okay. So the second question is, why did I embrace a vegan lifestyle? I started working on the environment in 2006. And very soon I began to realize that there was more to the environmental problem than just changing our energy infrastructure, as Al Gore was framing it at that time. So I realized that we were using almost 37% of the land of the planet just to graze our animals. So enormous amounts of land is being used just to graze our animals. And I was a vegetarian at that time, and I thought, wow, maybe my consumption of dairy has something to do with it. But then I started looking up the scientific literature, and they all said dairy is not so bad. Dairy is just a little bit worse than going vegan, right? And at first I bought into it. But then I went to this forest in Rajasthan to see what was going on. And I took a picture of this fence. To the left of the fence, I saw all these old cows walking around eating up the forest. And to the right of the fence, it was protected land, and the forest had just come back. So this is in a place where the Thar desert was moving in. So you can see, by literally protecting land from animals, you're preventing the desert from encroaching the forest. So I realized that my consumption of dairy had a lot to do with, because these old cows were dairy cows who I didn't want to kill and eat. Therefore, they were living to be very old, because in India we don't kill the cows, right? So I realized that as a dairy consumer, I was not only responsible for those cows being born, I was responsible for keeping them alive because I don't want to eat them. So I realized that I was relying on people who eat beef to clean up after me as a dairy consumer. So I immediately decided to go vegan. And when I did that, at first I was scared. I thought maybe I couldn't do it because I really love my milk sweets and my pizza, and I thought I couldn't do it. But I said, okay, I'm going to do it for 1 week and try it out. And at the end of the week, I realized I could do this. It's not so hard. And when I realized I could do this, I had this huge sense of guilt lift off my shoulders. So when people say, don't make people feel negative emotions like shame or guilt when you're trying to convince them to go vegan, actually those negative emotions are necessary for us to make a transformation. I felt a sense of shame when I saw that fence in Rajasthan, and I realized I was responsible for the forest dying out. And then I felt this guilt when I realized I could do this. So this is why I tell people, when you decide that you want to go vegan, first you have to overcome your fear, then the guilt, then the shame, then the grief, then the lies, the delusions, the attachments. So literally it's opening the 7 chakras of transformation, the 7 chakras of change, because every transformation is about opening our chakras. So please welcome your negative emotions, because everyone gets them. And it's only through these negative emotions that we change ourselves, that we transform ourselves. So that was an important lesson I learned when I went vegan. So I did this in 2008, and the only thing I regret about it is that I didn't do it sooner. Okay? Because I feel great. My health improved, I lost all my arthritic pains, and I realized I had that guilt because I had overheard my grandmother talk to my grandfather when I was 6 or 7 years old. And my grandmother was telling my grandfather that this particular calf was drinking too much milk. And she was asking my grandfather, what do I do? And my grandfather told my grandmother, don't let him drink to his fill, pull him away after 10 minutes. So I realized as a child who was consuming that cow's milk, I was actually depriving the calf. But I tried to put it away in the back of my mind, but I never really did. I always had that guilt throughout my life. So it was great to let that go. So the third question is, what is the hardest thing about being vegan? And I can tell you, the hardest thing about being vegan is to watch my granddaughter grow up in a non-vegan world. Because she's been raised vegan, and she couldn't understand why people around her were eating animals, they were killing animals. And so one time I was reading her a story in bed, and at the end of the story, she asked me, Grandpa, who were the first human beings? Now, I promised her that I'll never ever lie to her. So I said, okay, I'm going to explain to you how it works. So I said, imagine that you're standing on the street, and you're holding your mother by your hand, and you ask your mother to bring her mother to stand by her side, and so on. So you create a long line of mothers on this side of the street. And on the other side of the street, you ask a chimpanzee to do the same thing with her mother and her grandmother and so on. So by the time these two lines go from Phoenix to Tucson, they would merge. It would be only one single line, because both lines are going to say, hey, that's my mother too. Now, she was 6 years old at this time when I was telling her this. So she immediately sat up in bed and she said, what? Are you telling me that animals are my family? I had never put it that way. But I said, now that you put it that way, yeah, you're right, they are your family. And she looked at me and she said, then why are people eating my family? Grandpa, make them stop, they're eating my family. She started bawling. Okay? So I realized at that point I had created a world full of monsters for my granddaughter, because she sees everyone around her eating her family. And so her cry, her bawling, was literally wrenching my heart out of my chest. So then I pleaded with her and I tell her, please stop. This is what I'm trying to do. In fact, this is my job. I'm trying to make people stop. It's my job to make them stop. So immediately she stopped crying. She looked at me wide-eyed and she said, "What? This is your job? Do you know you haven't done your job? When will you do your job?" And at that point, I'd known that if we don't get to a vegan world by 2026, we are all in big trouble. The whole world is going to be in big trouble because we are on track to wipe out almost all wild animals by 2026. That's how fast we're killing them. So I told her, I have to do it by 2026, otherwise we are all in big trouble. And she said, "Will you promise me that?" I said, "Okay, I'll promise you that." She said, "Will you give me a pinky promise?" I said, "Okay, I'll give you a pinky promise." So then she said, "You can never ever break a pinky promise." And then she went to sleep. So that's how our Vegan World 2026 project was born. And in that project, I consider my granddaughter to be my boss. I report to her. I tell her, I plan with her about how things are going to happen. And that is really the hardest thing that I've found about being vegan, is to see the routine lack of veganism in the world. The routine consumption of animals, the routine killing of animals, that is literally causing us to die off. So I wish that would change. I wish that would change quickly. It is changing very, very fast. So as Luke also said, I see how fast things are changing, and I can just project out into the future and see that we will have a vegan world by 2026 if we just maintain that rate of change. So I have a lot of faith that my fellow humans will join me and create a vegan world by 2026 so that we can all fulfill my promise to my granddaughter, which I see as a promise from my generation to her generation, that they will have a world that's thriving. And that's what we intend to leave them. So thank you all very, very much. I wish you a vegan world very, very soon.